dictionary, a distinction, just that, the distinctive distinction between citizens and foreigners leads to the drowning of well over 1,000 people in the Mediterranean each year, and to the death of a similar number in the deserts on the border between Mexico and the US. A political party is also a form of organization that defines, that separates them from us. But of course, there are other forms of organization. We can think of organization as being open, as being moving, as being a flowing, coming together and moving out. And I imagine that this conference is just such a fantastically impressive organization. But I think of it as being a very open organization. I think that the effect of this conference, I imagine, should be like a cascade with ideas generated and discussed here being taken back to all our different places, to London or Paris or Warsaw, and to our activities, to the songs we sing, the emails we write, the seminars we attend, the software we write, and then go spreading out. In other words, we have to think of organization as something that breaks the logic of the system, that breaks the logic of definition and identification of them and us. The desperation of the right reproduces capitalism because it adopts the logic of them and us and pushes it to extremes. If our organization is symmetrical to the organization of capital, like one army fighting another, then we reproduce what we are fighting against. And in the long history of anti-capitalist struggle, there are really two traditions. There is the tradition of the instrumental, state-oriented, and therefore symmetrical organization, the tradition of parties. And on the other hand, there is the tradition that seeks to articulate anger and ideas from below, that tries to listen to people and get them to express their ideas. In other words, the tradition of the commune or council or assembly. And from all that has been said, at least from what I've understood, the drive that is very clear behind the workshops is precisely part of that council tradition. And for that reason, very important. Though, of course, for historical reasons, there are often organizations that combine the two traditions in a relation of tension that can be productive or destructive. Our desperation then takes different forms, as they must, because capitalism is a many-headed hydra attacking us all the time in many different ways. For some of us, it is the attack on migrants that makes us most angry, or that we feel most directly. For some, it is the growing number of femicides. For some, the destruction of biodiversity, the militarization of society. All these things terrify us. But perhaps we decide to focus on one or the other And I think this is reflected, again, as far as I can see from the program, in the structure of workshops in this meeting. The workshops are necessarily, I think inevitably, focused on particular themes, the rise of militarism, the rise of fascism, etc. And this focus on particular themes is necessary, but then it always raises a problem of how we move on from the particular to the universal. It is the problem of the hydra, strike at one head and three more sprout up. As long as we live in a society dominated by money, dominated by capital, that is, as long as we live in a society in which the dominant connection between people is established through the exchange of commodities, then all these horrors will keep on recurring in one way or another, unless we can establish a society in which the social connection is achieved not through money, but through some sort of sharing, then there is probably no escape from the spiral of destruction in which we find ourselves. But how do we do it? I think we have to start from the particular and overflow. And I think there's perhaps a change in the direction of thinking about organization as well. That the old tradition really says, well, the real problem is capitalism. And unless you see that, then you are just being reformist. And I think now we have to start the other way around, and we do start the other way around with people's more immediate concerns. The fight to stop the destruction of biodiversity, to stop the use of fossil oil, to bring racism to an end. But then we have to overflow. I suppose that's really what we want to do, what we need to do. We need to overflow and say, yes, we will do everything possible to stop the extinction of plants and animals. But by the way, the only way really to stop the destruction of biodiversity is to abolish the power of money. And this means abolishing money as a social connection and creating something else. And I think of that as a sort of PS politics, a politics of postscriptum, to our particular struggles, in which we focus, yes, on the particular struggles that we're involved in, and then say, PS, by the way, in addition, we need to get rid of money, to get rid of capital. In other words, not to think of ourselves as an enlightened group of revolutionary activists, separate from the masses, but to start out from the growing mass desperation in the world and overflow from there to make connections and ask questions. Because organization is always a question and never an answer. Finally, of course it's a long finally, but we want to win. And even to say that kind of seems shocking, no? Because we're used to losing, and we're used to thinking, well, we'll go on struggling, and our parents did it before us, and if all goes well, our children will do it as well. But no, we actually want to win. We want to win, and we must win. We must stop the dynamic that is destroying the world, because we really want the girl in 120 years' time to have a life and to have a rich and free life. So when I say we want to win, I think not just that we must free Kurdistan, of course that, not just that we must improve indigenous rights in Chiapas or wherever, but we actually have to break capitalism. And I suppose what all the talks were doing was saying, look, this is the situation. We're now in this storm. And if we really want to think of this girl in the year 2145, then we have to break the way in which we relate to one another. We have to break capital. But breaking capital is not just breaking this force outside. Breaking capital is breaking the interconnection between human activities, breaking money, in other words, and creating something else. And this seems mad, no? And that's the point. We are mad. We are mad, and we have to assume our madness, because the only way to be human is to be mad. The only way to be human now is to say no to the inhumanity of capitalist society and to create something else. To abolish capitalism necessarily means creating something else. There's a point made by Silvia Federici, I think, as well. So it's not just a question of confrontation, it is also a question of creating something else. If we think of capitalism as a form of human interconnectedness, then obvious, if we want to get rid of that form of interconnectedness, necessarily we have to create a different form of interconnection. No? In other words, we can abolish capitalism only by creating other ways of relating to one another, other forms of social connection, which is what they're doing in Rojava. No? What the Zapatistas are doing in Chiapas, and what a million smaller groups are doing throughout the world. It's not enough. We haven't got there yet. But we have to push on in creating some sort of common sharing in all areas of human activity, some sort of commoning, some sort of communizing. Sometimes I feel that we're like Sisyphus. We're kind of pushing rocks up a hill, and often it feels that we are condemned to do that forever. But no, we can't accept that. We are pushing up, and we want to reach a tipping point. And as we go, we find two things. Firstly, that it is more difficult than we thought, that the summit of the hill keeps on retreating. But also, as we go, we find that this capitalism that we want to surmount is actually much more fragile than it appears to be, because it is built on an ever-expanding debt, because it is unable to generate enough surplus value for its own expansion. But that the existence, the growth of capitalism is increasingly based on a fictition, and this fiction could well collapse very quickly, as it did in 2007, 2008, but now possibly on a much greater scale. The crisis of 2007, 2008 was something that changed radically our perception of what is possible and what is not possible, though not necessarily in the direction we want. But clearly what is happening in the world at the moment is something we would have dismissed as being totally impossible just a few years ago. And that can change in our direction too. That what we now think of being impossible, actually we suddenly realize is very possible in 2 or 3 years' time. So in this storm, we are pushing rocks up the hill and trying to reach a tipping point, the summit of the hill, where the rocks will roll down and gather pace, and more people will see that what we are saying is simply common sense. That of course we must get rid of capitalism. Of course we must create something else before we come too close to extinction. And here we are in this fabulous meeting, pushing rocks up the hill, building our strength and overflowing, because we know we must win, we must create a different world. That, I think, is what we will be doing in the workshops, pushing and pushing towards the tipping point, knowing that this time we must and we will win. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, John, for your incredible presentation. I believe we have received the